Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to the study of Luke. Today I'm just giving a brief introduction to the book of Luke and wanted to introduce you a little bit to the man himself. We don't know a tremendous amount on Luke. We know just a little bit. One, we know that he's, as far as church tradition goes, that he's from Antioch. Now, when I throw out Antioch, if you were to take this from a geographical perspective, there were a few different Antiochs at that time, but this is the Antioch which Paul went to on his early missionary venture, on his early mission. And so we believe in part that that may have been when he met Luke. We don't really have a written down account of this is the day when the Apostle Paul and Luke encountered each other. And it's interesting enough, when we look at the book of Luke, you need to really think of Luke part 1 and Luke part 2, which is the book of Acts, or the Acts of the Apostles. And in Luke's writing, he goes from talking about, in the book of Acts, they and them, us, to then suddenly including himself into the writings. And it's interesting to watch that transition when all of a sudden Luke is now a part of Paul's travels and missionary venture. Luke is referred to by Paul as a beloved physician in Colossians chapter 4, verse 14. And we don't really know this for certain. We make an educated guess that Luke was a Gentile. Maybe he was a convert to Judaism, but we don't really have anything to lead us one way or the other than the way that Paul introduces Luke. And we find that in that same passage in Colossians chapter 4, verses 7 through 14, seeing how he talks about Luke may lead us to believe that Luke was a Gentile. But Luke is obviously one of the most studied and one of the most educated men of the day. And naturally, he and Paul would have gravitated towards each other because they're probably, of the men of the New Testament scriptures, are the most educated individuals. Luke writes with a very sophisticated, very impassioned version of Greek. And then Luke actually uses more medical terms throughout the book of Luke than many of the medical authors of that time period in ancient Rome. So that's, again, picks up a part of where we see Luke obviously being a physician. Now, as for Theophilus, the individual who Luke appears to be writing to, I know that some break this down and say, well, maybe the Theophilus, because it translates to lover of God, maybe it's speaking to just Christians in general, those who love God or those who want to know more of God. I tend to think that it is actually an individual. And I think when he refers to him as my most excellent Theophilus, it is likely that he was a Roman official. We know that at that time period, many of the physicians were actually slaves and worked for or worked under or served Roman officials. These Roman officials had been men that helped these men get their education, for lack of better wording. So Luke would have received his education by the help, financial aid of this Theophilus. And so we believe, again, we have to make a little bit of educated guess on some of these. We believe that Theophilus had granted Luke his freedom, or at least given him freedom of travel to investigate Jesus or to give this account. I think that he probably was already a believer at this point. Maybe he had become a believer under Paul's early missionary ventures and maybe in the city of Antioch. And now Theophilus wants to know more. He wants the history. He's not just satisfied with word of mouth and what he's hearing the traveling preachers or evangelists of the day say. He wants a detailed account. Now, I know what you might think at times is like, why the four different gospels here? And if we have the four different gospels and at the same time we say that all scripture is God breathed, you say, but wait, God's using these men to write this, and they have a unique style, each one. In human terms, I think maybe if we look at this like an orchestra, there's many different instruments, and there's one conductor, and God is the conductor, bringing the different instruments together to play a beautiful piece of music. And yet, each instrument holds a significant role. Each instrument is important. And if it's missing, the music can even sound flat at times, or it seems like it's missing something. When we take each of the Gospels, they each hold a different viewpoint. Maybe like if you think of a scene in a movie and there being four different camera angles. And here we have the four different camera angles, and Luke is giving us one of those camera angles, or he is maybe the cello in the orchestra. Luke primarily is written to the Greeks, or the Greek mind, the educated mind of the day. And it's not to say that the other people weren't educated, but it was seen as more of the philosophical, the mind that looked deep. And, you know, when he's talking about investigating and addressing these witnesses, the interesting thing, the Greek word used there, where Luke speaks of investigating and talking to many different witnesses, is the Greek word where we get our English word autopsy from. So he, again, slips back into his medical profession and is saying these witnesses broke apart the various pieces of the life of Christ. Some say, well, Luke used the book of Mark as his outline or his text. And it's possible. We don't know that with certainty. Some would even say that there's a missing gospel out there that was used as a primary text or a guiding text for Luke and for Matthew. I think that when people speak of the book of Q, as they refer to this missing text, I think it's the guiding hand of God. I believe that God is guiding each of the authors to take what they are going to piece together for the scriptures, and the Lord leads them as the conductor would lead the orchestra. There's a number of things that we find in the book of Luke which we don't find in the other Gospels. A number of miracles, some parables, well-known parables like the parable of I'm sorry, my mind slipped there for a second. The parable of the Good Samaritan, that's in Luke. The parable of the prodigal son, we only find that in Luke. And Luke has investigated and interviewed eyewitnesses to the events. And it's amazing to watch all of this being pulled together. You know, chapter 1 in Luke is over 70 verses. He's very precise in what he writes. I want to come back and not to lengthen the introduction here, but I don't want these videos to be too long. And I wanted to just give you a little snippet of what we're going to be looking at. I'm also going to be taking some of the other Gospels along the way in places where Luke does not speak of certain events, and we're going to put those events in this study as well. Luke will be the primary text for my message each day, but I want to really cover the life of Christ. And so there's times when Luke leaves an event out chronologically. I want to put that in, whether we find it in Matthew, Mark, or John, we will add that portion. as I say, Luke to me is significant because it's very precise, and then we have the second part of the book when we get into Acts. So I'm going to come back on Tuesday. These videos covering the book of Luke will be released on Thursdays and on Tuesdays. So I'm going to come back on Tuesday and finish out this introduction. I want to touch a little bit on the harmony of the four Gospels, of how they come together, and then just cover a little bit more for the book of Luke as we get ready to launch into chapter 1. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope your day is going well. Your New Year's going well. Until tomorrow, God bless.